I represent the slow tech, low tech keynote and school of thought here. You'll hear from some really capable neuroscientists and other experts in the field later on. But I wanted to offer a more traditional approach to transformation and see how that might hang together with our, the worldviews that we hold together. So I'm going to talk about death. I'm going to talk about what might lie beyond birth and death. And I'm going to do that in a particular order. So we're going to start with an opening practice. I'll say a little something about practice, that everything that comes after the practice hinges on direct experience. So I'm not a speculative philosopher or metaphysician. I'm here to actually invite us all to come deeper into our direct experience and see what meaning we make from our direct embodied experience. So really, everything hangs on what you're experiencing right now as an embodied conscious being. From the practice, I'll tell a little story that inspired me 20 years ago now, get into some classical wisdom teachings, and then kind of just for the fun of it, bring in some LDS theology and see what LDS theology says in dialogue with the classic teachings. And then we'll kind of wrap it up and open it up to some interaction. That's where we're going. So, I've taught a lot of meditation over the years and a lot of transformative practice. And I know in a given room, people will have a different relationship to the practice. Some of you might be thinking like, oh, amazing, we're going to meditate at the very beginning of the day of the conference. And other people, inwardly might be saying like, who invited the long-haired, unkempt guy? It is all the way back here, so I guess I just have to sit through it. So acknowledging that we have very different relationships to like the words like meditation and contemplation. But I hope you'll just treat it in a spirit of openness, like an open inquiry into your own embodied experience, and use that information, that direct knowing, to inform you about like what might lie beyond birth and death. That's where I'm going here. So we'll treat it as a bit of an expedition and gathering some data from our embodied experience. So with that, I'll invite you to settle in. So we'll just take a moment to settle in here. It's a good moment to silence your device if you haven't done that. And just feel into the environment. Just notice where you're sitting. Notice this embodied awake moment. We'll go for 10 minutes or so, just so you can pace yourself. I'd invite you to sit in a posture that lets you be really at ease, just really luxuriate in the body, enjoy embodiment, but not just relaxed, alert, awake, bright. We'll just take a few moments to settle in here. You can feel the ground beneath you. Feel the support of the ground, the support of your seat if you're sitting, the support of the ground if you're standing. And this is a moment where you might feel the momentum of the morning, the momentum of the week, of a whole lifetime, just starting to settle down a little bit, like snowflakes in a snow globe. Everything just becoming a little bit more still and clear. And if you like, you can follow along with me and just start to pay attention to the sensations of breathing. There are innumerable ways to do this, but I like to just pay attention to the torso. Just feel the expansion and contraction of the torso. If that feels comfortable for you, if it works for you. Stay with it. Let everything else be in the background, just sensation. I want you to just attend to physical sensation as it pertains to breathing in and through the torso. And as you do this, a little trick from the ages is to invite more sensory detail into your experience. That makes the experience become inherently more interesting. You can get curious about it as you notice more detail, texture, vividness in what's going on. So as you breathe in and out, not only can you notice the expansion, contraction of the torso, you can notice the muscles as you breathe, they contract, the torso gets bigger. And as you breathe out, the torso gets smaller, the muscles relax. In other words, simultaneously, there are forces of expansion, contraction. And when we're not paying much attention, we normally only notice one of these, if any. But see if you can just attend so closely to the sensations that you feel the expansion volumetrically through the torso and the contraction in the muscles helping you breathe. And then the muscles relax, expanding, and the torso contracts. Good. We'll stay with this. It's just another moment. Just really savoring the detail, the moment to moment flux of liveliness. And then I'll invite you to let go of that. Let go of any sense of being a person breathing or trying to manipulate the breath in any way, and just see if you can relax and allow yourself to have the experience of being breathed. So you're not trying to meditate, you're not trying to breathe in a particular way, you're just feeling, let's say, life itself breathing you. It's just happening. No one's doing it. Life itself is doing it. And as you do this, as you allow yourself to be breathed, you can call forth a sense of rest. In other words, effortlessness. You completely let go, stop trying to do anything. And yet, as it says in the Tao, nothing is left undone. Everything keeps happening somehow. So I'd like to ask you to call forth a deep sense of rest, ease, effortlessness in the body. Beautiful, just like that. And this sense of ease and effortlessness, this is actually what allows us to be more sensitive. We shift from a coarse level of mind, it's said in the traditions, to a subtle level. When we really relax and let go of undue effort, we become more sensitive. Our consciousness expands, becomes more refined. Stay with this flavor of rest for just a moment. And once again, I'll invite you to shift and notice another flavor that you might be able to detect and experience. A kind of fullness, a fullness of this present moment, of the now. Sometimes I like to call it just the simple feeling of being. Just relax, stay relaxed, and hold an intention to just notice a simple feeling of being, irrespective of the surface level experience, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling. Just notice that beneath all of that in the depths, there's this quality of beingness, I amness. It's just here, and it feels full, abundant. Fullness. And just allowing yourself to marinate in this quality of fullness, you might start to taste the flavor of oneness. At the heart of your experience, there's just a basic quality of being, of wakefulness, aliveness. And you might have the intuition that you share this basic wakefulness, this basic beingness with all that is. So if it's natural, you can allow this quality of oneness to come forward. Next, I invite you to notice the quality of peace. Another way of saying peace is being gentled, everything calm, everything at rest, but ready to spring into action if and when it needs to. So tremendous potential energy, power, but fully at rest, at peace. Not just an ordinary surface level peace, but a peace beyond any human understanding. Here, I'd like you to drop into a peace deeper than the mind can understand, deeper than the body can even sense or process. Primordial peace, which no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no hand has felt. Falling behind the display of it all into absolute peace, absolute rest, the source of all. And from the source, as you come back, as you bring attention to the particulars of your unique experience in this unique embodied vessel, feel these flavors mixed together, a sense of rest, but rest mixed with liveliness, vitality, a sense of fullness, your cup running over, abundance, even a generosity of spirit, oneness, which is just another way of saying love itself, and a profound peace, the capacity to move about, being gentle in life and fierce when necessary, wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove. Feel all of these qualities and more just already here, already present, when you just relax, shift your state, and open your heart to what's present. So if you closed your eyes for that, take your time opening them. Thanks for going on that little ride with me. I'll build on that. If you were just doing that and feel like I just missed the boat, I don't know what he said, I don't know where my mind went, don't worry, because life is going to give it to you again and again and again. You can't miss it. You can't miss it. That's my claim anyway. So why did I start that way would be a fair question. I'm going to tell a little story about a dear friend of mine who's been a teacher and a mentor. From the looks of him, he's just a merino wool sweater wearing guy who looks like he could have been your bishop or your stake president at some point. And I met this man, John Kessler, about 20 years ago. I would be willing to bet that most people in the room don't know him, but I could be wrong. He's a fairly obscure Mormon mystic. But I met him, the moment I met him, I knew him to be a profound Mormon mystic. And there are not many of these critters in the wilderness, at least that I'm aware of. So I took note. And John said to me about 20 years ago when I was first getting to know him, I had been in intensive Buddhist practice at that point. I was interested in meditation. I was interested in mysticism. I was interested in the whole spectrum of spiritual experience and human experience. That's the context in which I met John. And he said something to me casually, almost in passing. He said, "Virtue is the only thing you take with you when you die." What the hell does that mean? I didn't know what to do with it. It really jogged me. It was one of those moments, one of those Zen master moments where they say something and they unveil a certain aspect of reality. And I didn't have any clue what he was talking about at the time, but I knew that it pierced me and that it caught my attention. I wondered, what does that mean? I always thought I took nothing with me when I died, or I had all sorts of ideas about what living and dying meant. And John made this amazing claim that we actually take our virtue with us when we die. So what we did just now, before I told you this brief story about John Kessler, is we looked a little bit about what he describes as virtue, but what I've learned over years and decades, that like there are other teachers across the traditions that have their own language for this phenomenon, which I take to be really significant. We'll start with a metaphor spun by the very able mystic Cynthia Bourgeault. She's one of the great living Christian mystics, in my opinion, today, a powerful writer. She talks about tallow and wick, the outer life of the candle, and she uses it as a metaphor to describe the inner life of the human being, what might persist beyond death. She says, a candle gives of the materials of its outer form in order to release the heat and fragrance within. Only then do we see what a candle really is. Its outer life is tallow and wick. Its inner life is flame. Working within the raw materials of the physical world, we are to give birthing and body to the names of God so that the invisible becomes visible. We are midwives of the spirit. Bourgeault, this is actually a Sufi or an Islamic tendency to talk about the names of God. She's referring to the qualities, the inner subtle qualities, not perceptible to the eye of flesh, but something we can intuit through the eye of the heart. The names of God, spirit, capital S spirit, and she says it is our job to use the physical world to help midwife these qualities more fully into this world, to animate it and to bring it to life. This, I believe, is what John Kessler refers to as virtue. And in case you were wondering, in case this didn't feel familiar, this is not an original, let's say, teaching from Cynthia Bourgeault. This goes back to ground zero in the Christian tradition. Let's have a look. The parable of the wedding garment, Matthew 22, a really quick review for people like me who can't just see like Matthew 22 and be like, oh yeah, I know that story. The review, a king throws a great feast, and there are guests of honor who have received an invitation, but when it's time to show up at the feast, they can't be bothered. They're involved in their farms, their businesses, they're involved in the things of the world. And the king, furious, says, these guests aren't worthy of the invitation. He sends his messengers out in the streets and says, bring anyone, bring everybody, the good and the bad alike, bring them into the banquet hall so that I can share this feast with them. So all these people, all the riffraff, all the commoners, everybody out on the streets, they come in. And there's this scene that's quite striking, unless we read it, I think, with a particular sensibility. Why is it at the end of this parable that all these people come in off the streets? They were invited, after all. Like, hey, I was just minding my own business. You said there was free food. And the king notices a man who wasn't wearing the proper clothes. And he says, friend, how is it that you are here without wedding clothes? But the man had no reply. Then the king said to his aides, bind his hands and feet and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. So what's the deal? How do we make any sense of this? They invited us off the street. We come in, they say, your clothes are no good. Get out of here. Like you're punished 10x for coming in. And Bourgeault reads it in this way: unless one has already woven this garment in the alchemically transformed substance of one's life, the door cannot open. When we die, the scaffolding falls away and what has been created stands on its own. So perhaps hidden in plain sight, there's this teaching, there's this contemplative and mystical teaching of the wedding garment in the Christian tradition. What is the wedding garment? Why does that poor guy get not only thrown out back onto the street, but into outer darkness? He has failed in this lifetime to weave the garment to transform himself in a way that it could bear the presence of God. In other words, the work we do alchemically with this tallow and wick, with this physical body and structure, it makes possible a process that allows us to withstand the intensity of eternity. In the words of the poet, it is these subtle qualities that allow us to bear the beams of love. There's a lot more to say about this, but I'll move on because I want to open it up to some discussion as well. So we have the theme that we've talked about virtue, we've talked about the candle, we've talked about the wedding garment. And I'm just suggesting, what if these vessels that we all have the privilege to live in and express through, what if these vessels make possible an alchemy that allows us to give rise to what George Gurdjieff calls the second body, the body that's built for eternity? And lest we get too bogged down in our parochial Western tradition, I would just like to presence one of my favorite teachers from the East, Sri Aurobindo. And this quote is stunning, and I believe it merits some good, hearty digesting. He writes, even if science, physical science or occult science, even if science were to discover the necessary conditions or means for an indefinite survival of the body, if we could perpetuate life forever, still, if the body could not adapt itself so as to become a fit instrument of expression for the inner growth, the soul would find some way to abandon it and pass on to a new incarnation. The material or physical causes of death are not its sole or even its true causes. Its true inmost reason is the spiritual necessity for the evolution of a new being. This is a whopper. And if you're familiar with Aurobindo's body of work, it is sprawling and dizzying. But he's making an awesome claim here that like this vessel that we have to enjoy, it's actually a stepping stone. This body must die because the soul itself will need to feed on a higher order substance in order to continue its growth. That's the claim. That's what Aurobindo's talking about. I'm stunned by it every time I read it and contemplate it, and I hope we can contemplate it together in this session and throughout the rest of the day, and as a community, as a tradition. So we can come back to Aurobindo. Here's this awesome wisdom teaching. And what strikes me, if we come back westward for a moment, almost exactly contemporary with Aurobindo is the great Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. What's interesting, Teilhard was so controversial as a Jesuit priest in the Catholic tradition. He was forbidden to publish any work in his lifetime. So I don't know if Teilhard knew anything of Aurobindo. My guess is he probably did not. But we can say with confidence that Aurobindo knew nothing about Teilhard because Teilhard was exiled in Mongolia, looking for ancient bones and artifacts, and was only published posthumously. So these two great minds and hearts gazed into one reality and had something strikingly similar to say about it. I wanted to say a touch about Teilhard, which won't be enough. But Teilhard wasn't only a philosopher, a contemplative, a mystic. He was a scientist. He was a world-renowned scientist. And he talked in a very unconventional way about energy as a scientist. He talked about tangential and radial. A couple words about that. Teilhard writes, tangential energy makes the element interdependent with all elements of the same order in the universe as itself. What does that mean? It's essentially the binding energy of the cosmos, what causes the subatomic world to bind together, the electrons, the molecules, the multicellular organism. What causes the planets to rotate and hold together? What is the glue of the entire cosmos? He talks about an energetic exchange, which physics tends to call energy. He says that's just one kind of energy. That's tangential energy. Radial energy, on the other hand, attracts the element in the direction of an ever more complex and centered state towards what is ahead. So a crash course in Teilhard, and a crash course doesn't do him justice. He's quite difficult to wrestle with, but rewarding. But essentially, he's saying for every outer structure in the cosmos, whether it's a slab of granite, or a human being, or some transhuman entity that is beyond our capacity to understand, he's saying there's a structure to it. There's an outside to it. And there's an inside to it. He talks about radial energy as the withinness, the interiority of any structure in the cosmos. So his writing not only flew in the face of Catholic theology, it flew in the face of contemporary science. He said, the world isn't made of matter alone, it's made of consciousness. And it's the consciousness that necessarily accompanies all structure. For Teilhard's tangential and radial, Aurobindo had a strikingly similar term. He said the entire universe is not made of just matter or consciousness, it's made of consciousness force. So he would hyphenate this word, consciousness force. There's an inside and an outside to everything. In other words, at the most foundational level of creation, everything is awake, but it's subtle. This radial energy, it's subtle, right? It's not obvious at very small scales of existence, but when the world harmonizes, when the cosmos produces humans, consciousness becomes more apparent, and the effects of consciousness on creation start to take effect. That's probably more than I intended to say about Teilhard right now, but the point being, this radial energy, it is a subtle energy that tends towards self-transcendence. It's evolving towards greater and greater consciousness and complexity all the time. So to bring it back down, one of Teilhard's able interpreters is the contemplative and theologian Ilia Delio. And she grounds this in a way that I find very relatable. She says, in his original and insightful way, Teilhard drew together consciousness and love. He spoke of love as the energy of attraction and consciousness as the energy of transcendence. So love is that energy that binds and creates structure in the first place. The radial energy, the consciousness, that's what transcends the structure and is always reaching for some new structure. And that's the take home. That's what I want to really emphasize, that in this model, whether we're in the Aurobindo school or Teilhard or the wedding garment of the New Testament, it's talking about a subtle energy, higher order cosmic substance that is inherently self-transcending. And as it transcends itself, it is begetting and making possible new, more subtle structures in the cosmos. It's this dialectic where love and consciousness are always at play without end. It's a stunning vision to me. I'm getting there, and then I'll open it up for some fun with everybody. We got plenty of time. So let's look at some LDS theology. Consciousness force, spirit and matter in Teilhard's language. This is, let's say, familiar ground to a lot of Latter-day Saints. The first scripture that came to mind for me when I kind of put LDS theology in conversation with Teilhard and Aurobindo is D&C 93. For man is spirit, the elements are eternal, and spirit and element inseparably connected receive a fullness of joy. And when separated, man cannot receive a fullness of joy. In other words, without matter, spirit does not have the structure it lacks the springboard to self-transcend. Spirit needs matter, just as the candle needs tallow and wick in order to express its inner life. Spirit needs matter to express itself, and matter needs spirit every bit as much. It's a completely interdependent relationship. And yet, where I think we might run into trouble as a tradition in our theology, and I almost can't shake a stick at all of these verses in the canon or contemporary interpretations of the canon. A verse like Alma, chapter 40, verse 23 from the Book of Mormon, the soul shall be restored to the body, and the body to the soul, yea, and every limb and joint shall be restored to its body. Yea, even a hair of the head shall not be lost, but all things shall be restored to their proper and perfect frame. Scriptural interpretation is one thing, but if I were to just, focus group the crowd right now, how do we generally read this in the tradition? What does this mean when everything will be restored to its proper and perfect frame? How do we take it? Anybody want to be bold and shout it out? Physical resurrection. And what kind of physical? What does that look like? What do we mean by proper and perfect and restored? What does that tend to look like just in the common vernacular? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's like me, but like with less hair loss and like get rid of the scars and whatever else, right? It's like, what's that? Yeah, celestial hot. Thank you. That's brilliant. Something like I planted him there. So there's this sense we take this doctrine of spirit and matter, and in a way we risk rendering it inert by saying like, oh, the resurrection means like you're perfect right there, freeze, bam, right? But what if that common interpretation betrays a certain anxiety towards the impermanence of the self, a genuine death? Like who you think you are is going to die. Who you think you are is already not who you are, and what you're becoming, you cannot imagine. It is literally over our heads. In a transhuman and a post-human world, we can't imagine as human beings what we're becoming. And yet the wisdom teaching is that you can alchemize, you can work with the tallow and wick you have now. You can alchemize what's given to you to alchemize and give the rest to the eternities and the mystery. It's something like that. So I want to go just slow down here on the language here, a literal read, an expansive read. I would argue that we could read the same verse where we're looking at the word restore, and we could even go back to the same, like the much used dictionary, Webster's 1828 edition, which gives us some insight into how people were making meaning of language back when the Book of Mormon was published. Restore, we tend, at least popularly, we tend to think of that as, oh, restored back to my celestial hot, restored back to like everything's perfect the way I want it. Potentially that's an egocentric way of reading the verse. But if we really branch out into the full semantic cloud of the word restore, whether in 1828 or 2025, words like return, repair, reestablish, a word that I didn't put up here, but I could have renew. So what if in this second body, what if in this subtle alchemized body, the wedding garment, if you will, it's not a return, it's not just a return, it's a reestablishment of a truer self. It's the renewal of a self that we cannot in this current state imagine. So I would suggest that these verses that we've read so many times and kind of as a community have a way of interpreting them, the meaning is it's anything but settled ground, in my opinion. These verses, these wisdom teachings are far more expansive than maybe we've given them credit for. So it leads me to a couple questions, and I'll start to move to a close. is our literalness carrying over into science and technology? Is there a way in which our same apprehension, our anxiety about death, about the impermanence of the self, is that leading us down an interpretive path of science and technology where, it used to be God who's going to take care of death. Now it's technology that's going to take care of death. I would say at worst, that's a risk we run as let's say, a pro-technology, theologically informed community. I think we should still be on the lookout for that natural anxiety of impermanence, right? A more beautiful question, at least to me, I'll leave it for your consideration. What if technology is not teaching us to defeat death as an enemy, but to cooperate with death more intelligently? What would it look like to cooperate with death? What would it mean to reconcile ourselves to the inevitability of death? Not death as terminus, not death as finality, but death as threshold. The poem that I named this presentation after comes from the Persian poet Rumi. He talks about being a mineral and dying and becoming a plant. And then I was a plant and I died and I became an animal. And after rounds and rounds of death, he says, like, what difference does it make? When was I made less by dying? And then he goes on to say, when I die now, when I give up this tallow and wick, when I give up this physical body, I will soar with the angels. And when I die to the angels, what I become, you cannot imagine. And Rumi, like all the great wisdom teachers, is inviting us through the threshold of death, not around it, not cheating it, not saying like, oh, we die, but we really don't, because we come back, bam, just like that, perfect. It's like, no, you're everything you've ever thought you were, that's going to die. But what you'll take with you is the wedding garment. What you'll take with you is your most essential self. And that essential self is, frankly, as far as I can tell, beyond our capacity to cognize, to reason out. And yet it's real. It is substantive. It has force. That's what John Kessler claimed in passing 20 years ago. That's what Jesus told of the wedding garment in the New Testament. I want to acknowledge that everything I've just set up here requires a leap of faith. It's just another story. As a scientific materialist, I could say like, no, the world is just made of stuff. And this whole like consciousness thing we're talking about, that came at a late stage of the game. It seems to be like some kind of epiphenomenon. It seems to have come out of matter. That too is a story, and it requires a certain leap of faith, I would suggest, right? What I like about this particular leap of faith that I take, a couple things I want to recommend to you. The one is that when I live as though this body is completely impermanent, like when this body is gone, it's gone, gone. That encourages me. That even creates an urgency to like perform the alchemical work I'm given to do now. So it changes the way I live in a very practical way. It changes the way I walk the earth as a human being now. Forget what happens after death, so-called. But I think an even more satisfying reason I like this story about the wedding garment and the sacred alchemy of the human being is that it lets me include my full experience. And what I mean by that, when I quiet the mind and settle the body, like we started with, when I feel a simple feeling of being at the heart of what I am, and I feel that beingness flowing from an ineffable source, I cannot detect in my human sensing how old is this love that flows from this font? How old is this hope? How old is this quality of forgiveness that I feel in my heart? And mercy. How old is mercy? And yet it lives in us in a unique way, right? It's ageless. This story I like because it includes the timeless, boundless experience I have as a human every day. It doesn't deny it. Just to close out and open it up to some questions, discussion, the parallel gospel I was exposed to too late in life. This comes from the Gospel of Thomas in the Eastern tradition. Yeshua, which is Jesus' Semitic name, he says, give attention to the living presence while you are alive, so that when you die and have the desire to do so, you may have the power to attend. Whatever becomes of us as a human race, wherever technology takes itself, my hope is that we can attend to the living presence before us, a living presence that when I examine it in my direct experience seems to entirely transcend birth and death itself. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. We have a mic over here and a mic over here. So if you want to like line up, and we can just try to take turns for a few minutes. Right there and there.
I know your face. What's your name? Hi, Jordan. I recognize you. Good to see you. If we could do a kind of roaming mic too. Oh, that got my thumb real good here. You just take that. That's cool.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was very beautiful.
Thanks, Jordan.
So I think I'm in good company here among a bunch of sci-fi readers and nerds. Not sure if that's your genre or not, but there's a great series of books called the Hyperion Cantos.
Say again.
The Hyperion Cantos. Are you familiar with those at all?
I haven't read them, heard of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Teilhard de Chardin is I think a big influence on the writer. And he, in the last, book of this series, there's a Messiah figure there who kind of embodies this, I guess, radial energy of love, and uses that energy, which is, what they teach is it's one of the actual like forces of nature,
Awesome.
To bring kind of a harmony to a world that's on the precipice.
Yeah.
And as a person is more of a material naturalist myself, a person that when I hear people talk about source, my natural inclination is to scoff. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about when you talk about something beneath or behind nature.
Right.
I don't see how that can have any bearing on the universe.
Right.
But I deeply and desperately want to.
Right.
Do you feel like for those of us like myself that there's a way to sort of will that into existence, even if it wasn't in the original design?
Is there a way to will it into existence?
Love as an actual force of nature?
Oh, that's a lovely and a deep question. I mean, my heart's response is absolutely. To me, it comes back to a question of faith. I take faith to mean like a claim we make about reality. We say, this is what reality is. And then we act as if it's true. And then we get feedback from reality. Is it actually true? I don't know, but I'm acting as though it's true. If we act as though love's true, that will have an effect on the way we show up in the world. So absolutely. And I want to offer one thing as well. Again, I'm not here speculatively as a philosopher doing metaphysics. I'm an armchair metaphysician at best. But in the contemplative tradition, which is where these wisdom teachings originate, they're certainly complemented by them. Just like a scientist would need the right instruments to observe the natural world, to find out what's going on, there's a millennia-long tradition of fine-tuning our contemplative instruments to get as good a look as we can at, like, what is the nature of experience? What is the nature of nature? So I would say to you and all of us, I think scoffing at like certain language, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's intelligent. And if there's any bit of curiosity in you about like that particular world, to consider investing in some instrumentation and just seeing for yourself, taking a look at it. That's all I'm doing up here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kimball Bradford. In your talk, you seem to give a really big importance to the distinction between having a death that you move through versus some sort of transformation.
Right.
To me, I find that to be almost more just a semantic difference, right? With the story that we tell ourselves between how we move forward.
Yeah.
What provides such value to like death specifically as this almost like non-continuous transformation rather than a more like incremental kind of change?
Yeah, thank you. So you use the word semantic, which is helpful and informative. Again, I'm speaking here as a presenter, using language, using the tools of language, and maybe even some rhetoric, some would say. It's not a semantic difference I'm pointing to, it's experiential. So what is that experience? If I were to describe it, and again, I'm relying on words for a moment here, but what I'm interested in is seeing through this cloud of, let's say, annihilatory panic when we're faced with death as human beings, and seeing if we can get a clear glimpse beyond like that cloud of anxiety and fear and need to reify a story about this is the way things are. In other words, if I can open myself up to a kind of groundlessness, a kind of unknowing, I find that I get a different data set that comes in. Like in modern critical theory, there's a phrase in vogue in the academy, loves knowing. There are certain aspects of the human experience we can't know outside of the experience of being in love. And love's knowing reveals a certain aspect of the cosmos to us. In the same way, I would say unknowing, groundlessness, accessing an experience of timeless boundless, that causes everything to look different. It informs our theology, it informs our philosophy, our science in a new way. And I believe that's what some of these towering thinkers are pointing to. And what I would contest is that we can't get there with the mind alone. I think that's what made like the Aurobindos and the Teilhards so great. They had prolific minds, but like very open hearts to a wide range of possibilities. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Jordan, number 2. And then I think we're on break pretty soon.
Yeah, so I want to kind of follow up on this Jordan's comment.
Yeah.
So I resonate a lot with what Jordan asked as someone who's kind of gone through a phase of natural atheism, and yet I've used a lot of these mindfulness practices in a functional way as a therapist and finding, wow, this works.
Yeah.
Even if it's not pointing to something literal.
Right.
But my question for you has to do with this kind of, you mentioned essential self.
Right.
And some of the kind of, I've experienced this kind of death that's like, this is different than transformation. This is like everything, and I'm losing it.
Right.
And there's different types of experiences that can initiate that. I'm wondering the loss of this essential self, right? Nothingness. Where does void, in the Mormon, we might call it outer darkness. Where does that resonate with you in terms of a sense of what this annihilation panic? Because that for me is the difference, is this kind of, it is a leap of faith, and it's incredibly scary.
Right.
And on the other side of it, you wake up and you see your kids and your wife and your dog.
Right.
And you're still breathing.
Right.
And I don't know if it's essential self, but I feel love. I don't know if I willed it into existence.
Right.
But I don't know if there's a questioning here, but it's something about nothingness. It's something about, is there an essential self, or is it nothingness?
I hear you specifically asking about the relationship between essential self and nothingness. Is that right? Yes. Yeah. I'll try to do that in under 30 seconds. In a sense, I've spent a lot of time in the Christian contemplative tradition and the Eastern traditions, especially Buddhism, looking at what they mean. What does it mean to be spiritually mature? What does it mean to cultivate virtue? What does it mean to wake up? What is classical enlightenment? Blah, 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 all that stuff. I think something, if I can call it the great human tradition, what the human tradition holds in common. So there's a recognition with spiritual maturity that we see through more and more our wrong ideas about things. And like, again, far be it from me to make any metaphysical claim, but just in a practical claim, as a guy who also wakes up and sees his daughter and like spends time with his dog, I find that when I see through my limiting beliefs, my wrong ideas about who I am and about what the world is. The experience is one of virtue. It's one of freedom. It's one of compassion. It's one of openness. Whether that has a claim on the afterlife, I'll leave to you to consider, but it certainly has a way, back to Cynthia Bourgeault's teaching, that these qualities, if we can alchemize them in the vessel we're given, they animate the world right now in a way that's completely fresh and enlivening and inspiring. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll hit you up at the pineapple table at break, and we can talk. Thanks, everybody. It's break time.